Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, or morning, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining us today for our fourth webinar in the CSBG Annual Report webinar series. I am Monique Alcantara, a Management and Program Analyst at the Office of Community Services. Before we get started, I would like to go over some housekeeping items. First, everyone has been muted on entry. Please enter any questions you have using the Q&A pod function on Zoom. We will have time to address those questions at the end of the webinar. And this Q&A is what the presenters will be monitoring. Third, this webinar is being recorded. The recording, along with a copy of the slides, will be posted to the OCS CSBG Webinars page linked here. My colleague Nikki will also add the link to the chat. The recording as of right now, the slides for the first 3 webinars are available online, and the 4th webinar or the 5th webinar will be posted today or tomorrow. During this webinar, you can expect to learn or relearn reporting requirements, how to some important SmartForm details, how to complete the SmartForms. While this should serve as a refresher to some, it is new for those who are doing this for the first time. And lastly, we'll discuss where to find some tools and resources. Just to quickly go over reporting requirements, the CSBG Act Section 678E outlines the requirements of the CSBG Act, including the requirement to submit annually, provide a measured performance of the state, Sections B, D, G, H, and I of Module 1, an account of expenditures, including administrative costs, and a description of training and technical assistance offered by the state. Just as a reminder, though the CSBG Act is a requirement, the CSBG Annual Report is a requirement, please also remember that your annual report is a tool for you to share the story of CSBG, to better administer CSBG in future years, and also as a way to look back at all the good work that you've done in the past year. If you were able to join our previous webinars, this should be familiar. A complete fiscal year 2022 CSBG Annual Report includes the submission of your regular CSBG Annual Report, Modules 1, 2, 3, and 4, the submission of your CSBG Cares Annual Report, Modules 1, 2, and 4, and the submission of your Disaster Supplemental Annual Report, Modules 1, 2, and 4. We'll refer to these reports collectively as the CSBG Annual Reports. The CSBG Annual Reports are due March 31st, 2023, and the requirements for the annual report submission can also be found in CSBG Action Transmittal 2023-01. Today's webinar is primarily focused on the submission of Modules 2 and 4. Module 1 requires direct data entry into the Online Data Collection System, or OLDC, which we'll review during Thursday's webinar. Module 3 also uses SmartForms, but those SmartForms are attached, and we'll also review that during Thursday's webinar. However, in order to submit Modules 2 and 4, there are 2 extra steps that you must take prior to submitting through OLDC. So let's go over those steps very quickly, and then I'll hand it to my colleague, Muska Cameron from NASCAST, who will provide some details about the SmartForms, as well as a refresher on how to complete and export those SmartForms. So CSBG eligible entities first submit their data and comments to their state, either via the state database or the SmartForms, which we'll review today. And states have probably already provided those SmartForms to you for any eligible entities that are joining us today, and given you a due date as to when you should submit those SmartForms back to them or submit your data via the state database. The states will then review and export that data to an XML. And then states will upload the XMLs to the Online Data Collection System, or OLDC. The XMLs will save, which is a function in OLDC, and then the states will submit the state level form, including attachments and comments in OLDC. We'll go over this process, especially the last 3 steps, a little bit more on more detail on Thursday's webinar. And today we're really going to focus on this step of states review of the eligible entities submitting the data within a SmartForm, and then the states reviewing and exporting to XMLs. So with that, I will hand it over to my colleague Muska from NASCAST. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monique, and thank you to everybody for joining us today. The session today is focused on SmartForms, so if you do not use SmartForms, it may not necessarily be applicable to you. So we are going to be focused on walking through how to use the SmartForms. So regarding the release of SmartForms to states and local agencies, every state should have received their Module 2 and 4 SmartForms by now. If a state has not received their forms, please contact Bryce Nguyen at her email address, which is listed on screen, and copy me. My email address is listed on there as well. And also please include CSBG states at acf.hhs.gov so that we can give you access to the SmartForms for your state. If you are a local agency joining us today, you should contact your state office if you have not received your SmartForms yet. So if you're a local agency, your state office should be providing you with your SmartForms. If you are a state office, we should be providing you with your SmartForms, and you should have already gained access unless somehow you have not gained it, in which case just reach out. As far as those states using a state database, you may or may not have received SmartForms for Module 2 and 4, depending upon whether you've requested it, but everybody should have received their Module 3 forms. So if you have not received your Module 3 forms, again, if you are a state office, please contact Bryce Nguyen and copy me and CSBG states at acf.hhs.gov. So moving on to general information on SmartForms. Each SmartForm comes pre-populated with a few different things. Number one is eligible entity name. So you should have SmartForms for all of your eligible entities, and the SmartForms should specify the name of each eligible entity. If you're a local agency, please check that your name is included on the SmartForm. Another thing that is pre-populated on the SmartForm is the DUNS number for the local agency. And then a third thing that is pre-populated on the SmartForm is the previous year data for that agency. And the reason for that is because the SmartForms have a number of validations and checks built in where the data that you enter for fiscal year 22 is going to be checked against the previous year data just to make sure that everything is being entered in correctly. So if you are a local agency on this call, please, before you start doing data entry, make sure that these three things are in your SmartForms that you received, which would be your name, your DUNS number, and your previous year data if you have provided previous year data. So as Monique said earlier, eligible entities complete and submit the SmartForms to your state office, and your state office may have set a specific deadline. March 31st is the deadline for the states to submit the data to OLDC, but your deadline is going to be earlier than March 31st, and it's going to vary state by state. So again, please ensure to reach out to your state office to know what your deadline is to provide those SmartForms to your state office. Once you provide those SmartForms to your state office, the state is going to export the Module 2 and Module 4 forms to an XML file to upload to OLDC, and we will be walking through all of those steps. Module 3 is not going to be exported to XML. It is simply going to be attached in OLDC. So some of the basic standard functions that come in the SmartForms, there's an instructions tab. It's just a generic tab that provides information about the SmartForm, but the main tab that you're really going to want to concern yourself with is an outstanding errors and warnings tab. And we will walk through what that tab looks like, but that tab essentially lists out all the flags that are triggering in your SmartForms. Like I said earlier, your SmartForms are going to come with previous year's data in order to support those validations that I mentioned earlier. And a critical function that is built into your SmartForms is your SmartForms have macros. That's what allows for some of the advanced functionality to export to XML. and all of those things there. So you must enable editing or enable content to activate the macros. And if you do not see those buttons, and we'll be showing a screenshot of those, please email Bryce if you're a state office, and local agencies, you should email your state office. And this applies to your regular CSBG SmartForms, your CARE SmartForms, and your disaster supplemental SmartForms. So before anybody begins data entry in these forms, please check for a few things. Those identifying fields I mentioned earlier, which is your name, DUNS, and the previous year information. But then critically, please check that you have an enable content button and that you're able to export to XML, because that tells us that the form is functioning properly. If you do not see those options, the form may have become corrupt and it's transferred to you. And there are a number of reasons why that could have happened, but we need to make sure that you get a proper functioning form. So please check for that before you begin data entry. And again, I will walk through each of those specific things. So as far as process for using your SmartForms, it's a similar process as years past that we have had. There's just one new step this year. Of course, technology loves making our lives difficult, and every year there seems to be new and enhanced security measures, which are intended to help us, right? And they're really great for security purposes, but it does add a couple new steps into the process. So this year, Excel did push out an update. And if your Excel has the update, and mind you that your Excel may not have the update, in which case this step does not apply to you, but if you do have the upgrade in your Excel, you will need to engage in an extra step this year, which is to unblock macros, and I will be walking through the specifics of all of that. But in a nutshell, what the process looks like is you want to download your SmartForms, and typically we recommend downloading them into a folder that lives in like your My Documents or Downloads, for example, not necessarily a OneDrive type of shared location, right? It just works easier if it's saved into a location on your actual drive. So you download the SmartForms, and then you're going to want to unblock the macros. And then once you do that and you open up the SmartForms, you're going to enable editing and enable content. And then once that is done, you will start entering data, and the final step will be to export to XML. And these are the same steps, whether it's your regular CSBG SmartForms, your CARE SmartForms, or disaster SmartForms. So for the rest of this session, I'm just going to walk through step by step here. So let's dive in. You've downloaded your SmartForms, and now you may need to unblock macros. So if you open up your SmartForm and you see this red message above, it's going to say security risk. Microsoft has blocked macros from running because the source of this file is untrusted. It looks like a scary message. It's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong happening in the SmartForm. This is just part of that new security measure that I mentioned earlier that Excel is pushing out. So if you open your form and you see this red security message, what you want to do is you want to close out of your form, and you are going to need to unblock the macros. Now, if you don't see this red security message, then this step is not applicable to you. Your Excel may never have pushed out the update, in which case you don't need to worry about this step. But if you do see this security message, you are going to want to do what will be on the next screen for steps to unblock your macros. So exit out of the form, go to your folder where the form lives, and you want to right-click on the form. And so they'll give you that menu of options there, and you are going to want to click on Properties. Once you click on Properties, you are going to see a pop-up dialog box, which will show up on the next slide. So you should see a pop-up dialog box like the one on screen here. And so there are several tabs, but you want to stay on the General tab. And down at the bottom of the General tab, you are going to see a little message there on security. And over to the right at the bottom, you are going to see Unblock with a checkbox next to it. You are going to want to select that checkbox to unblock, and then you are going to click OK. So it's one additional step, but it's a really, really simple step. It's you simply right click on the form, go to properties, click unblock, and then click OK, and your form should be good as far as unblocking the macros. And so again, you may or may not see the security message that would prompt you to do this. If you see the security message, that's when you would need to do this step. You do not need to see this. You do not need to do this step if you do not receive the security message. So if you do not see the security message, you just want to make sure that you are still able to enable content in your SmartForm. So if we can move on to the next slide. Once you've unblocked macros and you open up your form again, you should see any of these two options. It should be either enable editing or it should be enable content. You always want to click on those before you begin data entry. That is because your validations will not work well if you don't click on this, and the form in general will not function well if you do not click on this. So always, always, always make sure that you are seeing these options up above in your form before you begin data entry. So keep that in mind. Okay. So with that, you've successfully opened up your forms, you've unblocked macros, you've enabled content, you've enabled editing, and now you can begin entering data into your forms. So when you type data into your Module 2 form, you'll notice that you'll have two screens essentially side by side. On the left side is your fiscal year 22. That is where you type in your current data that you are trying to submit for fiscal year 22. And it will be blank, obviously, for now, because there's no data in it. You have to provide the data. So you will be entering that data on the left side of the form. On the right side, you will see a little bit faded. You will see your previous year data, and that is there for reference because it is informing the validations that I mentioned earlier. So when you are completing your Module 2, you should notice at the top of your form, your left-hand side should say fiscal year 22, and your right-hand side should say fiscal year 21. If you are a state office and you are reviewing your forms from your agencies, please make sure that they are using the forms for that year. And a really simple way to check that is just making sure, again, that you're seeing fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 21 on the forms. And agencies should not be reusing forms from a previous year. That will not work for upload down the road into OLDC. So a really quick visual check is making sure that the right years are listed on the forms that they give you. And if you're a local agency, please make sure to use the forms for that fiscal year. So as you enter data into Module 2, you will start to see errors and warnings pop up, and that will look like either yellow highlighting or red highlighting. Yellow highlighting is for warnings. That means that something is triggering a flag just because the forms come with standard programmed in validations, right? So we just have to standardize the forms, which means we have the same formula feeding into every form. So if you have a significant variance from the previous year, which means the data point is either more than double or less than half of what you reported last year, you're going to see a yellow warning, and the warning is not intended to scare you for any reason. It's just triggering because that's what the formula is reading. And in that case, you want to pay attention to it. Look at the data point that's triggering a flag, double check it, right? The information could be correct, but it's triggering a flag just because of those standard built-in formulas. If the information is correct, make a note of it, make a comment on it, and move on to the next warning and error, right? So that's what the yellow warnings are for. It's meant to draw your attention and for you to double check and confirm that the information is in fact correct. And so on the screen, you can see an example of yellow warnings popping up. Now, if you see a red highlight, that is not a warning, that is an error. And in theory, there should be no errors in your final submission to your state office. And if you are a state office, there should be no reason for errors to be in the data at the time that you submit into OLDC. So at a minimum, please do ensure to resolve any red errors. Those errors exist when there is a logic flaw where something just cannot be that way in the data. For example, if you fill out one data point and it's tied to another data point and you didn't complete the other data point, that is an error because you did not complete your data entry and your data entry must be completed. So you will see instances of errors here and there that show that there's a logic flaw in the data that you put in that absolutely must be resolved. So please do pay special attention to the red errors that show up on your form. In Module 2, just want to make a note of a common area of errors and warnings that we see. If you are typing in an other resource, so for example, on the screen, you see a screenshot of other federal resources, and there are a couple other places in Module 2, Section C, where you might be typing in an other resource. Please ensure to complete proper data entry, which means you must provide the name of the resource, a CFDA number in the proper format, which is the format on screen, and then a dollar amount. So make sure that you're not missing any one piece of the data entry there. So again, as you're completing the forms, you always want to be mindful that you are completing all the fields that need to be completed and that you're filling out the data accurately. So that is what the Module 2 form looks like. And now we will be moving into the Module 4 SmartForm. Very similar to the Module 2 form in that it also has errors and warnings built in as you complete data entry. So as you notice on the screen here, and I just want to put out there that this is completely fake data in case City of Glendale's on this call and they're like, oh no, our information is up here. Please do not worry. This is completely fake data I made up just for the purpose of this webinar. So I wanted to show you, for example, where I start typing in data for an NPI. So for FNPI 1A, I typed in 100, number of individuals served. I typed in a target for 85, and then I left actual results blank. Notice that there's a column there that says NPI entry status, and it is telling me row incomplete. That is because I did not complete that entire row there. I left out the actual results, and you notice that it is showing red. Again, red errors must be resolved, right? There's no reason why that should be blank. Even if it's a 0, because 0 people accomplish the results, just type in that 0 there. But otherwise, you always want to make sure that you are actually typing in all of the information as needed. Another thing you will notice in the Module 4 SmartForm is notice that there is blue highlighting on the screen. Blue highlighting is there primarily for reference. It does not inform any errors or warnings. Errors and warnings will only be yellow or red. but we do have blue highlighting mainly for reference for you to see, for example, where your targeting might be a bit out of range, and that range is 80 to 120%. So if your targeting is below 80% or your targeting percentage is above 120%, you will notice blue highlights in your form. And again, it's really just intended to be there for reference for you guys, because yes, you are filling out the forms to submit your report, but you should also be using the forms to gain an understanding of your data and to do analysis with it later to figure out what improvements you may need to make in your programming. And the target accuracy is there just as a source of information for you to let you know, hey, your targeting was really off this year, right? Or etc. So that's just there for reference. You will not see those blue highlights show up on your errors and warnings tab, so you do not need to worry about it for the sake of submitting the data. Another thing you will see on the Module 4 SmartForm is, notice up in the top right corner, I put a box around 3 buttons. You will see a button to go to the instructions. You will see a button to go to a table of contents, and you will see a button to go to your errors and warnings. And that is because the Module 4 SmartForm is a pretty sizable form. There's a lot of tabs on the form, so it might be difficult to navigate, but we added those buttons here, and they've been, as long as we've had Module 4, those buttons have been there to help you navigate through the form. So if you want to go to a table of contents, there's a table of contents with links that can take you easily to different parts and places of the Module 4 SmartForm. And on each tab, you should see an option to go back to the table of contents. And you'll also see that button to take you to the errors and warnings, so you can check out that tab to review the list of your errors and warnings. And you can also toggle back and forth between the errors and warnings tab and the each singular tab on the Module 4 SmartForm. So it's there for ease of navigation because it is a lengthy form and there are a lot of tabs there. Now, as you complete data entry in Module 4, you will notice in the All Characteristics report, we just want to make a note about subsections E and F. These subsections will show up in your All Characteristics report, which is where you report your demographic data. It is your demographics report. And at the bottom of that demographics report, you will see subsections E and F. And this is intended for those programs that you are unable to deduplicate demographic data for. So for example, you're reporting demographic data in the All Characteristics report, but you might have a program that you're pulling from a completely different data set that you cannot combine necessarily with the data set that is informing the demographics report without unduplicating it. So in that case, you would just type in and say, hey, this is my light heat program, and here's the number of individuals that were in that program. And that just tells us that those individuals may or may not be reflected in the demographic data above, but they're being pulled from a different data set entirely that you cannot unduplicate. So that is what the intent for that Module 4 Section C, subsections E and F is for. Now, in the last 3 tabs of Module 4 is where you will see the comparison tabs. So on the next slide, you will be able to see a screenshot of the comparison tabs. Notice at the bottom, those tabs are red, so you will see a year-to-year comparison for the NPIs. You will see a year-to-year comparison for the services, and you will see a year-to-year comparison for your all characteristics. Again, these tabs are primarily for reference. They do not actually feed into errors and warnings. That is because your NPIs and services and demographic data probably does vary a lot from year to year. And so we don't necessarily clutter errors and warnings with checking those year to year, but those tabs are there for reference. So if there is a significant change there, you will be able to see it with highlighting, primarily again, because you should also be using the SmartForms to analyze data and figure out what that information might mean for your programs moving forward, right? So that's why the tabs are there. They're primarily intended to be for reference. The only error and warning that will actually be created from these tabs is regarding your demographics. The all characteristics report, items A and B, is where you report your total number of unduplicated individuals you served and total number of unduplicated households you served. If there's a significant variance year to year on those two items, that will show up on your outstanding errors and warnings tab. And that is simply because we really want to make sure that you are reporting the data correctly for those items. Otherwise, the rest of the year-to-year variances here are primarily for reference. So you've heard me talk a lot about this outstanding errors and warnings tab, and so you will have it on your module 2 and you will have it on your module 4 SmartForm. That is where all of your errors and warnings are going to be listed. So when you are submitting your form to your state office, if you are a local agency, you should be going through this tab and you should be resolving absolutely any errors that are on this tab, but you should also be looking at all of the warnings. And if you need to resolve them, please resolve the warnings, right? Or if you take a look at something that is marked as a warning and the data is correct, you should be submitting a comment to your state office that lets them know, hey, there's a warning that's showing up here, but we did double check the data and the data is correct, right? So you want to be going through this tab before you submit to your state office. If you are a state office, you also want to be going through this tab with your agencies before you submit to OCS. And the tab is very easily navigable, so you can double click on any of the items on this tab and it should take you on the SmartForm to where the error is showing up. So it's meant to easily be able to be navigated. Now, where the errors and warnings are showing, if you double click on your outstanding errors and warnings and it takes you to that place on the SmartForm, yes, on this screen, you will see that the error and warning messages is also going to be showing up on the form itself. It will look like that yellow comment box and it will just easily tell you that's what the error and warning message is. So you will see that as a little pop-up comment box there. Same thing in module 4. If we move to the next screenshot, yep, right there, you're going to just see a little comment box there that explains what the error and warning message is. So there's highlighting, there's error messages, there's the outstanding errors and warnings tab, lots of different places to help guide you to where your errors are showing up. And you just want to resolve those and work with your state office. If your state office, work with your agencies to resolve them. Now, let's say you've been going through your errors and warnings, you fixed the data that needs to be fixed, but maybe there's data that's tripping up a flag and it's correct, in which case you would comment. And so a comment about comments for local agencies, if the data is correct, but it flags in the form, you should consider providing a comment that explains to your state office that the data is correct. And that really does help minimize the amount of follow-up post-submission to the state and to OCS. So obviously, as agencies, when you submit your data to the state office, that data goes to OCS, and then that data is reviewed at the federal level. And then there's a memo that's sent to your state office, who then probably is going to send a similar memo to you guys to resolve some of the issues, not necessarily issues, but resolve some of the flags that are showing up in your data. So you will have to do some work on the tail end, but you can avoid some of that work on the front end by submitting a comment that helps explain that the data is correct. If we see a comment that says, yes, this was tripping up a year-to-year flag, but the data is correct, we double checked, we're not going to comment on it during the federal review process. So comments do help. And just to note that we don't comment on targeting that is outside the 80 to 120% benchmark. I know that in years past, a long time ago, so if some of you were around, we did used to flag those, but we're not flagging them in the review at the federal level. So you do not need to comment on those things. Like I said, the blue highlighting is there primarily for reference to you guys. We also won't be commenting on where all targeted outcomes were obtained. That used to be a flag in the past. We are no longer calling it out. It is simply highlighted on your form for reference. And again, we don't check for year-to-year variances for NPIs and services and the all characteristics, except for those two specific data points I mentioned earlier, which was your total individuals served and your total households. Outside of that, we do not check for variation on those. They are there for reference, so do not submit comments on those pieces because they will not be checked at a federal level. And so you might be wondering, we've been talking about comments. Where should we be providing comments? And so there is a template that is available. There's a template for your regular report. There's also a template available for your CARES report. And so you can use that template to submit comments, and you just easily select your module, your section, the data point, and then there's a drop-down menu option of the message descriptions that you might be seeing, and then you can type in your justification there. If your state office has a specific template they want you to use, then that is what you will use. But otherwise, there is this template available for all. It's available on the NASCAST website. It was shared with your state offices as well for you to be able to provide comments. Now, a note about comments for states. When you receive comments from your local agencies, please make sure that you are reviewing those comments. I will say, I can tell when a state hasn't reviewed comments, okay? So we're just going to ask that all states, please do review your agency's comment memo before submitting to OCS. And there's a number of reasons for that. The agency may not be addressing the error or warning in question. We've seen instances where an agency is commenting something, but it doesn't necessarily address what the error is, right? So the error might be about a year-to-year flag, but an agency might just be talking about something else related to that data point. So that doesn't help resolve that error or warning. So you want to make sure that your agency's comments are actually addressing the error and warning for that data point. The agency may also be trying to communicate preliminary information that is not necessarily appropriate for final data submission. I've seen instances where agencies have said, yes, we actually need to update this data point, except when I look at the data, it doesn't look like they updated that data point, right? So you just review your agency's comments, and if they're indicating they need to make an update, make sure you work with the agency on updating that data before you submit it to OCS. And there are a number of other comments in there, right, that might be internal comments appropriate between an agency and a state, but not necessarily all the way up here. So again, as a state office, you really want to make sure you are reviewing your agency's comments in relation to the data and making sure that their response is actually resolving the issue. And if it is not resolving the issue, simply because an agency provided a comment doesn't necessarily address the flag, right? So you should reach back out to the agencies for further clarification until that flag is resolved or it has been noted that the data is in fact correct. So you've done all that back and forth. Agencies, you've reviewed your errors and warnings. states you have reviewed your agency's errors and warnings. You've made this report pristine. And so at this point, you are ready to export to XML. The state, for the most part, might be the one exporting to XML, but certain agencies might. It just depends on what the process looks like in your state office. So if your state has directed you to export to XML, then do that. Or if the state has directed you not to export to XML, then don't do it, and your state office will take care of it. So just work with your state office in understanding who's doing this piece of it. But for the most part, I believe it's the states doing this step of it. But you want to go to your outstanding errors and warnings tab, and you should notice an XML export button above. Now, I'll say the screenshot of my errors and warnings tab looks horrific because there's so many warnings and errors. We should not see that level right at the time that you're ready to export to XML. This should look like a much smaller list, but you want to see that XML export button above. And again, if you do not see that button, that means there's something wrong in the form, which is why I say before you begin data entry, make sure that button exists. Even if you're not the one exporting to XML, still make sure that that button exists and that it's working properly, because otherwise, if it's not there, or if you click on it and it's not working, you're going to do all this data entry only to have to redo it in a new form because there's something wrong with the form, right? So from the get-go, try to make sure the form is working. But anyways, so you're ready to export to XML, you see a button and the button is working well. You want to click on that XML export button. And when you do that, a pop-up dialog box should appear, and it's going to look like the screenshot up on screen. And so in this dialog box, you would select the folder that you want to drop in your XML file. And again, it works out better if it's a folder that's in like your My Documents or on your desktop or in your downloads, right? Something that's actually on the PC. It may not work well if it's on a OneDrive type of location, right? So you want to try to avoid issues with XML by clicking on a folder in your documents or wherever that lives. Click on the folder you want to drop it in and simply click OK. And voila, you should have your XML export done. So at that point, your export is created, and if you are state office, you are ready to upload those into OLDC. And in the next session, Monique is going to, in the OLDC training session that we have, you'll see how to upload those into OLDC. But once you've created your XMLs, the only piece left is you're going to want to keep those comments. So you're going to want to attach those comments to your state level form in OLDC. And again, we'll have another training session on OLDC specifically. And so just wrapping up here, that was it for your module 2 and 4 SmartForms. But for module 3, there is a form that you will use for module 3, and it's a light smart form. So it will have, you open it up and it should have your eligible entity name, state, and DUNS, just like the other forms. And there are links in the forms for pop-up windows to help you select your CNPIs and your strategies. And it's a fairly intuitive form to use, but for states, you are going to attach this in OLDC. There's no XML export with your module 3 form. You are simply attaching it into OLDC. And with that, we just have some tools and resources to walk through. So if you go on to the NASCAST website, there are a number of tools and resources just to help you figure out data entry in modules 2 and 4 and understanding the report itself. So we have instruction manuals, we have a lexicon to understand, what a certain NPI or service might mean. We have FAQs, crosswalks, a review checklist. Do check that out. We do not hide what we look for. It's all in there. So that will be there along with general instructions on using the SmartForms. And I'm going to pass it back on over to Monique for contacts.
Thank you, Muska. Just one thing I want to add, that as you're at the state and also at the eligible entity, it's important to retain this data. Because sometimes we are going to come back and ask you for updates, and you'll have to update those SmartForms. So as you're saving it to your desktop, we highly recommend that you create a folder that's easy for you to find and locate, for when we do come back with any questions. It's easy for you to just go back to that SmartForm, that original SmartForm that you created, to update any data that needs to be updated. So just want to give a quick tip on that, as that is something that we've seen this year during the reviews. Sometimes it's hard to find that data if it's not being saved in one space. So just a quick review of your contacts. We'll make sure that's updated, but we have your program specialist. For your OLDC technical assistance, you can contact myself, Nikki Frazier, for any issues that, and this is primarily for states, for any issues that you're having with submitting your information into OLDC. And here is the information for Muska and Bryce, if you have any questions about your SmartForms. And with that, we will go to questions. So Muska, we do have a question for you. Do we need to include CFDA's money, etc., for Module 2, B.4M, and other?
So that's a good question. Module 2 B.4M is actually in section B. So that is for your agency capacity building, where you are reporting staffs with certification. So CFDA and dollar amount is not applicable there. You are simply reporting the number of staff that have other certifications. All you want to do is just make sure that you're actually typing in what those other certifications are. The CFDA number and dollar amount, thank you, is relevant specifically to section C, where you are typing in your other funding resources that you have received. So I did see another question about what a CFDA number is. That is just how that funding source is identified. So
Muska, I'll touch on that.
Sure.
The CFDA number is a number that's assigned to every federal grant and every state grant. So for example, CSBG's CFDA number is 93.569. So as Muska was saying, it is important that as you're filling out this information, that you do include a description, you do include what the CFDA number. Sometimes people use acronyms for the description, which is this first space where you see an X. And so that CFDA number makes sure that when we're reporting it and compiling it for our report to Congress, that we are able to align them all together if you didn't describe it the same. So that is something that we would send back to you to ask you to update if it's not included when you originally submitted.
And if you're a local agency and you might not know, right, because you might have received the funds through a state office, right, or et cetera. I mean, it should be listed, but if you don't know it, reach out to your state office and they can probably help guide you. Otherwise, you can easily Google these as well. So it's always the same CFDA number for programs. CSBG is always going to have the same CFDA number. LIHEAP is always going to have the same CFDA number. So work with your state office. If you can't find it, try to Google it.
Thanks. And I just added this to the chat, but the CFDA numbers are available on samdem.gov. So, or you could just Google CFDA sam.gov and it'll take you directly to the site where you can search all the CFDA numbers. Moving on to the next question. For modules 4 NPIs, 0 is not able to be entered and enter in 1. I think that means column 1. I have a few examples in which column 1 is 0, but they have a target. Should they just not include that information since they did not end up serving folks? And I'll go over to that slide so that everyone could see what we're referencing when we're saying column 1 versus 2 versus 3. Muska, do you want to take a stab at that, or do you want me to?
So if there's a reason, if that is the reason, I will say that this shows up pretty rarely, though, then I would just make a comment about it, that is the reason why, and just make a note about it. This has actually been coming up, and I think we probably have to have a larger discussion on when agencies report, right, if it's targets, but they never were able to run the program, for example, right? I think that's a larger conversation, but just make a note of it to note that we had a target, but we just never started the program or whatever. That's why the NPI row is incomplete.
So I'll say, targets are, while we do use targets in the final report, if you set a target and you ended up not serving anyone and there were no actual results, it's okay to leave that row blank. So you do not have to submit a target if you ended up not if you ended up not having any participants that need to achieve that outcome. Because again, someone could have got services, but maybe they were not trying to achieve FNPI 1A. So if you didn't end up serving anyone who was trying to achieve that outcome, then you don't have to report it. You don't have to report the target, since there was no one served and no actual results. We do have a question. Is there a way to explain the warning message that comes up? I have a few that are in yellow, but my numbers are correct. And Muska, if you want to also talk to this, I will say if there's a warning question, you do not have to explain it, at least to OCS. We're not looking for a comment for those warnings. We're only looking for a comment for the errors. Now, at the state level, the state may want you to still provide an explanation for those warnings. And that's what Muska was talking about earlier when we were talking about comments being submitted to the state versus comments being submitted to OCS. So for OCS, we are not looking for explanations for red. The yellow is more of just an alert to you that something may not be correct. But if you know it's correct, there's no need to submit a comment to OCS. But for the red errors, we would 100% need comments for those. So
Yes,
do you want to add
as far as how to do it, it's that comments template, unless your state has a specific other template that you want you to use. So in the SmartForms itself, there isn't a place where you can comment on those errors and warnings. That has to be done outside of the SmartForms. So it could be done through that comments template we shared earlier, or whatever template that your state office may be asking you to do. But yes, errors and warnings, errors absolutely have to be commented on. Warnings, it's work with your state office on those warnings. If there is a significant difference there, you might still want to comment, just to help explain the data for somebody taking a look at it.
Thanks, Muska. We have a quick question. Did you say this was the third in a series of webinars? This was actually the fourth, or maybe the fifth. We had a kickoff webinar, and then a webinar that was focused on module 1, a webinar that was focused on modules 2 and 4, and now the SmartForms webinar. So the first 2 webinars really were for the states, and then the remaining, the module 2 and 4 and the SmartForm webinars for eligible entities. The webinar that we've mentioned for Thursday is for states, since it's about OLDC submission. But the recording for all webinars, even though they're directed or primarily for the states and territories, if you want to see those recordings or see the slides, you're more than welcome to on our webinars page. I think my colleague Nikki already included the link. The recordings are still going through review, but we are recording all webinars. The recording for all webinars will be available through our CSBG Webinars page, and we will send out a notice once all of the recordings are available. Our next question is, states do the export to the XML step, right? And so just going back to those steps again, yes, the state should do that export to XML while the eligible entities are submitting the data to the states, either through the SmartForm or the database. The state is then reviewing that data in the database or SmartForms and then exporting to XML. So I do not recommend that the eligible entities do that, because then it will be an extra step that would have to be taken twice. And I think we've answered the question about submitting an explanation for the warning. I did see another question come through on that though. So as Muska said, sometimes if there's a large variance and it's a warning, we do recommend submitting a comment just to explain that variance. But yes, it does cut down on the number of comments, and does make the review easier if your comments are more so focused on, again, those major variances or changes from the year to year, as well as those errors. While we're hoping that you're able to clear all errors, we understand that sometimes that can't happen, and that is just correct. So we do ask for a warning on that, or a comment on that. Muska, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's exactly right. Is for those warnings, right? You do want to comment on some of those large variances there. And if you do comment, it does help cut down the amount of the amount of comments you get back after the federal review process. So that's absolutely right.
And then we have another follow-up on that. Do the errors and warnings go away on the list once it's corrected?
If you are changing the data, like let's say there's an error and you should be changing that data to fix the error, yes, that error will go away once you fixed it. Same thing with a warning. If you realize, oh no, I accidentally put 2 extra zeros here, let me fix that let me fix that dollar amount or whatever. If it's no longer, more than double or less than half, that warning will go away. But otherwise, if the data stays the same because it is correct, that warning won't necessarily go away. It'll continue to stay flagged just because the program is reading it based off of a certain formula. And that's fine. That's when you provide a comment instead. But yes, if you change the data and it no longer trips up the flag, it will go away from the outstanding errors and warnings tab.
So we have a question asking if we could share the link on this slide. I believe it was this link that they're asking for to the chat. I'll ask my colleague Nikki if she can add that to the chat so that you can have direct access to that. What do we do if the 4 spaces in C.4N other state resources is not enough and we need a 5th or 6th line? I think we've talked about this before, Muska. We do have an expanded report that will allow for more spaces, but for now, we do say to include the 4 that have that I guess that provide you the highest amount of resources, so the highest funding. If you try to enter more than 1 in those spaces, it will come back as an error when the state tries to upload it into OLDC. They won't be able to upload it. So utilize the 4 spaces as much as possible. But we will update that shortly to allow for additional spaces. We have a question about no comments on the warnings, cut down on items on a review memo. And what I'll say to that, and Muska, feel free to chime in as well, is Muska mentioned that when we're looking at comments, sometimes the comments that are provided do not always really address the issue. So while yes, it could potentially cut down on items in a review memo, that's not always the case. And what we've seen sometimes is that people will provide a comment for every single data points, and we don't want that either, because that actually adds more time to review memo, and it doesn't actually reduce the number of comments that we provide to you in your review memo. So the idea with the comments is to make sure that the comments are really answering the issue that is at hand, or the question or the comment we have question on. And sometimes our comments in the review memo wouldn't be seen through the validation checks that are in the SmartForms. So a lot of times our review is not focused on the validation checks that are already in SmartForms. We've cut back a lot on those. Muska, did you want to add anything?
No, I think that's exactly right. Is just try to keep in mind, if it's addressing an error and warning, just make sure it's directly addressing that, in which case, yes, if there's a flag tripping up because of year to year and you said this is correct, that's it. We're not going to be calling it out. You will never see us call it out. But again, you just want to be as mindful as possible that it is in fact addressing the error and warning. But to Monique's point, a lot of times we look for things outside of the SmartForm errors and warnings, such as comparing your outcomes to your demographics sometimes, right? So those things are not built into the smart form, but we will be reaching out about those things. Now, if you happen to incorporate that into your review process and you provide a comment from the beginning, that might help with some of those things. But like we said, you just need to be intentional that it's actually addressing the error at hand.
Is OLDC open yet for submitting the federal fiscal year 2022 annual report? Yes, it is available. So you can start doing direct data entry for module 1. You can start submitting attachments for module 3, and you can start uploading your modules 2 and 4 XMLs. For those who are starting module 1 data entry, and we're going to talk about this more on Thursday, please, please, please check section C and make sure that your eligible entities are loading. If they are not loading, you have to start over. And if you submit without your eligible entities loaded, we will return it to you during the review process for you to submit. And at that point, you'll still have to start over from scratch. So it's very important that for section C, you are making sure that your eligible entities are loading. They should also load in section E and section H. We'll talk about that more on Thursday, but that is very, very important that you check that before you fill out any other sections, because if they're not loading, that triggers that there's an issue with pre-population across the report. So you should contact me and Nikki right away. In years past, we have a couple larger agencies that exceed the dollar amount limit on module 2, section C. Is there still a dollar limit?
There's a dollar limit just for data entry purposes, but we are always trying to improve smart forms to make them as useful for you guys, the end users, at the end of the day. So if you know that there's an improvement that needs to be made, please reach out to us and let us know, and we'll try to address it in future years. So if we need to adjust that, we can work with our developer to try to adjust that dollar limit.
Thank you. Can you touch on adding CARES to the regular reports for module 2 if the numbers are wrong on fiscal year 21 and correct on fiscal year 22? Should a comment be submitted for the discrepancy? Yes. That's the short answer. We know that there may be some incorrections on fiscal year 21. You should be receiving those review memos shortly. That being said, we're not expecting like a mad dash to go update 2021 in order to submit 2022. Once the 2022 CARES report is submitted, we'll be working with NASCAST to ensure that we're looking at the data as 3 years, and we may ask you to go back and update prior year data, which that's why it's so important to retain your reports or your smart forms. But yes, if you know that there was a discrepancy on fiscal year 2021 and you're correcting it in fiscal year 2022, that is a great comment to include in your comments page. Those are the types of comments that we're looking for. NASCAST, did you want to add anything to that?
No, that's exactly it. And I'm just happy to see that folks are noticing that they did something wrong for fiscal year 21, which means that you're learning how to do it for fiscal year 22. And that's the goal here, is let's get it right for fiscal year 22. And providing those comments gives us that context for when we look at the 22 data.
Okay. And I think that we also have a question about what is the time frame for CARES, and I believe that Genevieve may have answered that, but your time frame for CARES is you're reporting on your fiscal year 2022. Remember, for modules 2 and 4, you can report based on the state reporting period. So if you're a state that reports based on the state fiscal year, your time frame for CARES would be July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2022. If you are a state where the reporting period is based on the fiscal year, that will be the reporting period for that will be October 1st, 2021 through September 30th, 2022. And if you're a state that reports based on the calendar year, then it's January 1st, 2022 through December 31st, 2022. One thing is that CARES and disaster are considered subsets. So they should be reported based on the same reporting period that you report your regular CSBG. And in addition to that, Module 1 must be reported based on the federal fiscal year of October 1st, 2021 through September 30th, 2022. So I hope that answers that question, but if you need additional, please let me know. Yes, OCS is still planning on sending fiscal year 2021 review memos by January 31st. We'll go over some timelines about that in our next webinar, which is on Thursday. So if you are a state, please plan to attend that, but we will also be recording it. I do not see any additional questions. So with that, we will say goodbye. Thank you so much for joining us today. These recorded webinars will be posted shortly. Again, we will announce when they're posted so everyone can have access. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to the program specialist, as well as your state, if you're eligible entity, or Muska and Bryce at NASCAST. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.